And now it's time for part 4 of an InfoWars exclusive interview with Kurt Haskell, witness to the government cover-up of Delta Flight 253. Now, it is a fact that the U.S. government allowed the underwear bomber to board the plane even though he had no passport and was on the government terror watch list. Passenger Kurt Haskell famously witnessed a sharp-dressed Indian man force officials to let Abdul Muttalib board the plane, again, even though he had no passport and was listed as a potential terrorist. And of course, the establishment media, they have predictably remained silent on this epic story as they continue to regurgitate the official government fable of the underwear bomber. But fortunately for you, the InfoWars viewer, you're about to get a dose of the hardcore truth. An interview with Kurt Haskell, key witness to the false flag terror attack aboard Delta Flight 253, the subsequent government cover-up that followed.
Walk us through what you saw in Amsterdam.
Sure. Lori and I were sitting near the boarding gate, sitting on the floor. There weren't any seats to sit in. And I saw two men, and they caught my eye because they seemed to be an odd pair. One was what I would describe as a poor-looking black teenager around 16 or 17, and the other man, a age 50-ish, wealthy-looking Indian man, and I was just wondering why they were together. Kind of strange. And I watched them approach what I would call the ticket agent, the final person that checks your boarding pass before you get on the plane. And I could hear the entire conversation. The only person that spoke was the Indian man, and what he said was, this man needs to board the plane, but he doesn't have a passport. And the ticket agent responded, well, if he doesn't have a passport, he can't get on the plane. To which the Indian man responded back, he's from Sudan, we do this all the time. And the ticket agent said, well, then you'll have to go and talk to my manager. And she directed them down a hallway. And that was the last time that I saw the Indian man, and the black man I didn't see again until he tried to blow up our plane.
I assume, though, that they're not patting people down in the crotch area, which is where this fellow allegedly had the bombs.
We could deploy the scanning machines that we currently are beginning to deploy in the U.S. that would give us the ability to see what someone has concealed underneath their clothing.
I also want to point out, in your current role as a security consultant, you are representing some of the companies who manufacture that technology, correct?
Absolutely correct.
One thing I'd like to point out is that the system worked.
Well, the underwear bomber case is important because it's the most, in my opinion, it's the most clear evidence of a false flag event by the U.S. government. I think if you actually take the time to look into the evidence, the official version is not backed up by anything other than statements by members of the government. There is actually a great deal of evidence that backs up what I'm saying. So it's important in that sense that it's a very clear picture that the U.S. government stages terrorist attacks to forward their agenda, whatever that may be at that time. Not only that, but if you look at how the government's treated this case, you can see all the tools they use when they use the false flag attack, which is, denying evidence and telling the media to not report certain things, blasting in the media all the unimportant things, propaganda issues that support their story, the government forwarded story, not the real story. And it just gives you a real window how they handle these things. And if you look at the picture of this, how they handle things, and you see things happen in the future, you can take their playbook, if you will, and apply it to the ones in the future. And tell what's a false flag event or not. There had been no terrorist attacks on flights in the U.S. since 2001, so people were kind of getting, weary of the war on terror, thinking, hey, why are we spending all this money on the war on terror when there is no war on terror? Nothing's happening. We're not stopping anybody. Number two, we had, back in when this happened in December 2009, we had certain parts of the Patriot Act that were up for renewal. They actually came up for renewal in early December 2009, just a couple weeks before this happened. And you can look it up on the internet. Hillary Clinton actually said, look, my constituents don't want to vote for the renewal. They don't think it's needed, and politically this will be damaging if, you know, my party votes for renewal of these parts of the Patriot Act. So they delayed the vote till, I believe, February 2010, and look what happens in the meantime. There was a bill that had already passed the House of Representatives, and the bill was to restrict the use of body scanning machines to secondary use only, meaning you would only have to go through the body scanning machines after you had set off the metal detector. And this had already passed the House. It was pending before the Senate for a vote in early 2010. And again, look what we have in the meantime, the underwear bomber attack. Incidentally, despite the fact that this bill had already passed the House and was pending before the Senate, the TSA and Department of Homeland Security continued to order many more body scanning machines for the airports. So, you know, read into that what you will. So, all of those reasons really, and basically they needed a crutch for the war on terror. Nothing was happening on the war on terror for many years. And now all you hear is, you know, every time the war on terror is brought up, or these enhanced procedures are brought up, TSA here and TSA there, and if you see something, say something, it all goes back to the underwear bomber. They all say, well, we need it because of the underwear bomber. It's a crutch. It's a crutch for any of these policies at all. So, you know, you can see how it's played into all of this.
But there are a few things we could do to make things better. First, we could deploy the scanning machines that we currently are beginning to deploy in the U.S. that would give us the ability to see what someone has concealed underneath their clothing. That has been vigorously opposed by the ACLU and privacy advocates. The House of Representatives voted to prevent us from using it. But I think now there's been a very vivid lesson in the value of that machinery.
In your current role as a consultant, do you have an interest in body scanners?
We consult with all kinds of firms, including firms that do manufacture body scanners.
You do have some interest in more sales of body scanners.
As well as a lot of other security measures. But I would point out that I've talked about this for probably the last 3 years.
You know, I don't really have any evidence on whether Chertoff was involved, but, you know, it's really suspicious to me that the former head of the Department of Homeland Security now works for body scanning companies, and there's so much money going around. You know, did somebody do a favor for Chertoff here, you know, that was paid back with some money? I don't know. I think it's entirely possible, but again, I don't have any evidence on this, so I don't know. But yeah, it's highly suspicious that you have former head of Department of Homeland Security peddling body scanning machines, making who knows how much money off of them. Metal detectors were doing fine before the underwear bomber incident, and they were not the reason he got on the flight, obviously. So it's an unreasonable search, in my opinion, because all the body scanning machines are not necessary. They make you show a naked picture of yourself to unknown people, and they might cause you cancer. We don't know. But if you don't do that, you have to opt out. And therefore you have someone feeling you up, looking down your pants and grabbing you between the legs. That's an unreasonable search, so it's definitely a violation of the Fourth Amendment. When I talk to people about this, the main response I get is, well, whatever it takes to make me feel safe, and that's a pretty discouraging response to me, in my opinion, because Americans will just voluntarily give up constitutional rights based on a lie. It's ridiculous and depressing.
Coming up, are you willing to give up a lot of your privacy when you go through security at the airport? How about a revealing full body scan? Would that be okay with you?
It does seem to me that we're becoming a police state, that's for sure. There just seems to be getting more and more and more security, you know, based on whatever the government says. You know, they make a statement, so therefore we need this, or they stage this event, so therefore we need this. And, you know, at what point do we not need security? At what point was the security not okay back on 9/11? No matter what you think about the 9/11 events, even if you don't think they were another false flag attack, they could have been prevented entirely. We knew all about them. We knew about the attackers flying in flight schools before this happened, and it could have been prevented. We didn't need new measures from that either. But, you know, you see where this goes. The government uses these terrorist attacks not only to take away our rights, but to justify wars that they're definitely using for other purposes, you know, to steal oil, to topple regimes, to steal gold, whatever reasons you believe, to stop competing currencies backed by gold, whatever reasons you think. They're definitely not to liberate people. You know, if they were, why aren't we liberating Mexico? You know, they have all kinds of crazy things going on there now. Why aren't we liberating North Korea? You know, why is it restricted to these countries in the Middle East that have oil? And now we have, if you see something, say something, which incidentally I did, but you can see where it got me. You know, and talk about these body scanning machines going into bus terminals, train stations, malls, and wherever else. So you can see how they use this. My understanding of the NDAA, and what it does is it allows the U.S. government to detain anyone they want indefinitely if it declares that such person is a terrorist. Now, what's the definition of a terrorist is left solely at the discretion of the President of the United States. So if President Obama declares you a terrorist, the government can arrest you and hold you indefinitely without a trial. They don't even need to tell anyone they're holding you or where. You'll just disappear. That's what the NDAA allows. It's totally out of the playbook of the USSR or Nazi Germany, where the government can just come in and say, hey, you're going to disappear, sorry, and you're gone. And no one knows what happened to you. That's what it allows the government to do. Now, who is a terrorist exactly? Am I a terrorist? Am I a terrorist because I speak out against the government and I've informed the public of a false flag event? I don't know. Am I a terrorist because I was going to testify on the behalf of Abdul Muttalib? I don't know. What's interesting, too, is you don't actually have to be a terrorist. The law actually says that you can just be someone that's adding aid of some sort to a terrorist. So, again, I go back to the question, am I a terrorist for being willing to testify on the behalf of Abdul Muttalib under the NDAA? Seems likely that maybe I am. Am I aiding a terrorist by telling the government that they're staging false flag events, and therefore, you know, these terrorist groups have a defense to some of these terrorism trials? Maybe I am. Maybe I can be locked up indefinitely. And this is a gross violation of our constitutional rights. It doesn't get any more clear, you know, that you're entitled to due process under the law. You're entitled to a speedy trial. And this doesn't even allow you a speedy trial. It doesn't allow you any trial at all. And they're not even required to tell your family if they've taken you or anything. It's a gross violation of law. It's totally unconstitutional. It's all about power. And what's telling is that I believe 93 out of 100 senators voted for this law, something like that, like 93%. And I have to ask, so what incident could unite them so much that they would pass this clearly unconstitutional law? And to me, the answer is obvious. The answer is that they passed this law not to deal with crazy Islamic Muslim terrorists, but to be able to label anyone in the United States a terrorist, for to deal with them and just take them off the streets during the coming global unrest that will happen here in the U.S., which I think is inevitable and will happen here very soon. I expect a total economic collapse in the U.S. very shortly, and then we're going to have all kinds of chaos here, and the government passed this law not to deal with the terrorists, but to arrest U.S. citizens and take them off without having to do a trial or give any justification. I think that's why you saw 93 senators out of 100 voting for it. I was previously going to sue the government over the underwear bomber attack for intentional infliction of emotional distress, and I've recently decided not to. And actually, the statute of limitations expired on Christmas Day 2011, so even if I wanted to change my mind now, I couldn't. But I wanted to give the reasons why I've decided not to sue. And there are basically three reasons. One, in late 2011, the government came out with a bipartisan report called Report on Fiscal Responsibility or something like that. But anyway, what this was is a bipartisan panel appointed by Obama to study the future of the economy. And every member on the panel indicated that the U.S. government would collapse economically in no longer than 24 months.
And now it's time for part 4 of an InfoWars exclusive interview with Kurt Haskell, witness to the government cover-up of Delta Flight 253. Now, it is a fact that the U.S. government allowed the underwear bomber to board the plane even though he had no passport and was on the government terror watch list. Passenger Kurt Haskell famously witnessed a sharp-dressed Indian man force officials to let Abdul Muttalib board the plane, again, even though he had no passport and was listed as a potential terrorist. And of course, the establishment media, they have predictably remained silent on this epic story as they continue to regurgitate the official government fable of the underwear bomber. But fortunately for you, the InfoWars viewer, you are about to get a dose of the hardcore truth. An interview with Kurt Haskell, key witness to the false flag terror attack aboard Delta Flight 253, the subsequent government cover-up that followed.
Walk us through what you saw in Amsterdam.
Sure. Lori and I were sitting near the boarding gate, sitting on the floor. There weren't any seats to sit in. And I saw two men, and they caught my eye because they seemed to be an odd pair. One was what I would describe as a poor-looking black teenager around 16 or 17, and the other man, a age 50-ish, wealthy-looking Indian man, and I was just wondering why they were together. Kind of strange. And I watched them approach what I would call the ticket agent, the final person that checks your boarding pass before you get on the plane. And I could hear the entire conversation. The only person that spoke was the Indian man, and what he said was, this man needs to board the plane, but he doesn't have a passport. And the ticket agent responded, well, if he doesn't have a passport, he can't get on the plane, to which the Indian man responded,